good friends? Welcome back. Tom Kiely here, INN World Report Radio, every Tuesday and Thursday night here on the great Logos Radio Network. I am going to get right down to it. Fresh back from Russia and the Ukraine. We have not been able to have him on the show. He's been a bit incommunicado, as it were. Webster Tarpley back in the United States just only a few days ago. Webster, welcome back, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule this weekend with the Left Forum here in New York to come on the show.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you again, because I think I have some very interesting news about the Donetsk People's Republic, which is not part of Ukraine anymore.
Well, we're all set. We're ready to hear it, Webster. Let us have it, man. We want to get every last observation that you can share with us.
So let me tell you, first of all, my story. I've been to Russia and to Donetsk twice now in the past 2 months. I was there in the middle of April, and that was a tour organized by a Russian news agency, which is particularly active in Germany. It's called Europa Objektiv. And they had put out a call, right, that some people saw, that they said if you are a professional journalist, if you're not part of those rich people like CBS or the New York Times, we will assist you. If you can get yourself to Moscow, we will help you to go down to, as it turned out, Rostov-on-Don, down at the Sea of Azov, and then drive across into the free territory of Ukraine. In other words, the Donetsk People's Republic. So that whole process included a briefing in Moscow from some very knowledgeable observers, and then this trip during which I met some people, and some of this I've published. I'm behind on the writing and publishing, so please forgive me. That stuff will be coming, including quite a number of pictures. Then I had been invited to the Likhachev International Scientific Conference. This was organized by the Russian Academy of Sciences and the Russian Foreign Ministry in St. Petersburg, the former capital, right before Moscow, which is it's the largest city in Northern Europe. This is a whole story in itself. This is, of course, where the Russian Revolution, so to speak, took place, right? The Winter Palace, the Hermitage, and all this. So I was headed to this Likhachev conference. That is the largest scholarly, cultural, scientific, political conference in the world, I think. This time it was about 220 participants with papers from 30 different countries. I mean, one of them was the former president, Akayev of Uzbekistan, and some other very well-known people. Professor Galbraith, the economist from the University of Texas, was also there. So I'd been invited to that, and then just as I was getting ready to leave for that, I got an invitation from the foreign ministry, specifically from the foreign minister of the Donetsk People's Republic. This is a very intelligent man, Alexander Kaufman, and he said, look, Tarpley, you should come to the Independence Day, which marked the referendum. In other words, on May 11th last year, 2014, a very large part of the population of the Donetsk Oblast province voted to become autonomous, independent, and no longer take orders from Kiev. So this was the first anniversary. So I felt that I had to go. I think I was the only representative from the United States in this class, which I'm sorry for, but at least I was there. So the United States did not, get completely eclipsed. So we did what we could, and they were having some events also. They had a kind of a discussion conference of their own, right? Something along the lines of Likhachev, maybe. But I mainly went there to see the parade on May 11th, and then take part in the reception of the foreign ministry of Donetsk. So this is essentially the path that took me to knowing some of these things. I would just throw in immediately that after I had gone the first time, some of the same people that had helped me were visiting one of these neighborhoods in the northwest part of Donetsk, close to the international airport, and that is, of course, the Prokofiev International Airport. That's Sergei Prokofiev, right? The great, I think, fascinating composer.
The composer, right?
Wrote the Lieutenant Kiji Suite, right? I urge people to listen to this. He's one of the most intelligent and ironical composers of the 20th century. So he's from there, right? And there's an industrial town with coal mines, and they have these slag berms all over the horizon, right? In other words, when you have a lot of coal mining going on, it generates this byproduct, the slag. So it's there. So there are parts of Donetsk that are sort of under the gun of these Ukrainian fascist forces. And on May 2nd, there was a group of people the group that came after me was being, toured. They were getting the tour from the people. I had been to the same Oktyabrskaya neighborhood, the sort of the October Revolution part of town, right? So the journalists were there. Somehow these Kiev characters caught sight of them, and they actually began shelling them with artillery. And they had to go into the basements of these buildings, right, sort of rudimentary bunkers that are there. And, that's a place where old men and old women and sick people live. But those Kiev guys, they are merciless, right? They are fascist bandits in my book. And they started shooting at the people that I knew. And there's been another bombardment a couple of days ago in a place called Gorlovka, and that killed 5 people. So, what's going on, right? It's clear the force that is principally violating the Minsk II agreement is not the Donetsk People's Republic. It's the Kiev Soldateska, I guess we could say. So that's what's going on. Today is actually a day of mourning in Donetsk. Well, they had a wonderful celebration on May 11th. Now, the thing that I would want to talk about most about this is the economic program that they're putting through. Is most of the news coverage has focused on, military questions and so forth, and we can talk about those. But here's the big thing. I say that what is going on in Donetsk is the social revolution that many people in the United States have been hoping for, dreaming of, working towards. It's happening. And you have to remember, right, the revolution generally comes out of war, right, be it the Russian coming out of World War I, or the Chinese coming out of World War II, or the French coming out of the American Revolution and some other wars in Europe. And that is what has happened, right? Out of the military necessity and the colossal dislocations of this conflict, right, the struggle for independence, they now have a thoroughgoing economic reform. They are rolling back globalization, all this neoliberal stuff. I'll give you an example. I want you to focus on Boris Litvinov, or Boris Litvinov. He is a relative, apparently, of that Maxim Litvinov, who was the Soviet foreign minister up until about 1938-39. So this is Litvinov, right? And this is a late Soviet era government official, right? A bureaucrat, if you want, but with a great understanding of economics. So what has he done? Let's just tick some of the stuff off. When you walk into his office, he says, we have to tell you we are against neoliberal economics. We have to tell you we are against oligarchy. We are against the idea of national fascism, which is ruling in Kiev, and we want to have nothing to do with the enemy image of Russia. We don't regard Russia as an enemy in any way, shape, or form. Quite the opposite.
How does he feel about a central bank and fractional reserve banking?
Hang on. Come on, Tom. These issues, all of those stupid, Paul-tard libertarian issues simply do not arise when a real revolution gets going, and that's what it is. For the Paul-tards, we can say one thing. One of the things he did in this conversation was to take out a banknote, and he said, "This is our monetary token. This is going to be our new currency." So they've seized control of the central bank, and they're making it serve the needs of the entire economy, serve the people, if you will, not just a clique of bankers. But now let's get down to what they've done. They have nationalized the entire banking system. It is seized. It is nationalized, okay? Sorry, libertarians. Big government has come through in the clutch. This banking system had collapsed. It was largely owned by oligarchs who had joined the fascist cabal there in Kiev. So there was every reason to seize it. And not only did they seize it and closed down most of the banks because the place was overbanked. I mean, they seemed to have more banks than, hamburger joints. It was amazing. But they closed most of them except the Kolomoisky banks. And Kolomoisky was and is one of the most aggressive, nasty of all these oligarchs. So they took his bank and they said, guess what? The Kolomoisky bank is going to pay the pensions. And I saw people lining up, and if you go to tarpley.net, you'll see some of these pictures. The Kolomoisky people were essentially forced to pay out the pensions, and people were lining up, right? So they were lining up and getting ready to get their pensions, and they were just delighted. And the government was putting ads about this in the press. So banks nationalized. Then coal and energy in general largely nationalized. In other words, super regulated, operating under state supervision. Maybe not juridically nationalized, but seized and being run by the government, because it's one of the great coal mining areas of the entire world, and they need to ramp up production, right? I'm sure there are a lot of, Malthusian twits who don't like that, but that is the lifeline for them. You pick up a newspaper and it says, Budit Ugol, right? There will be coal. And that's, one of their fighting slogans, right? The Ukrainian side is bringing in coal from thousands of miles away, but the Donetsk side is exporting coal to Russia, but also to other areas. And not only do they have coal production, but they have, I think, understood one absolutely fundamental thing. They want to be the world leader in the technology of machine tools for coal mining and for all kinds of operations connected to coal mining. And they said they are the world leader. They can give you a better machine tool for coal mining than anybody else. And the Chinese and the Vietnamese are lining up to begin buying their, not just the coal, but the machine tools.
I'm sure we'll have a boycott against it here in this country for coal mining over here. Webster, hold on. We have to go on break. Right back, first 15 minutes. Welcome back. Dr. Webster Tarpley, fresh back from the People's Republic of Donetsk, formerly a part of the Ukraine, and a place where the people stood up and said no to oligarchy, no to neoliberal politics, no to fascism, no to Victoria Nuland, no to Barack Obama, and no to a whole lot of other things. And they're apparently really doing it. And Webster was there and saw the whole thing. Webster, why don't you continue to enlighten us on what's going on?
No to Russophobia. That would be another one. No to Russophobia. I think that was an important one. So, under the leadership of President Zakharchenko, I think he's a good man. Again, the president, he's the president of the country, okay? And he's an electrical engineer who worked in a coal mine. All right? Look what we have. We have parasites who came from investment banks and Wall Street and hedge fund hyenas and all that. And they have an industrial engineer who worked in a coal mine. So we
have a coal mine posing as an industrial engineer. All right, anyway.
He's a real industrial engineer in a real coal mine. So that's the president, and then then you take it from there. So there are any number of personalities that we should try to do justice to, right? Foreign Minister Kaufman, economic policy maker Litvinov, President Zakharchenko. These are all heroic people, and indeed then the generals, the military people on the independent side, right? There's one general I know him as Motorola, General Motorola. He's very capable. I met with the head of the International Brigade, who is somebody who's got people coming from Latin America, from the U.S. There's one very valiant one who's from Texas, and they all recognize that the one from Texas is an extremely effective fighter. So that's the International Brigade. It's like the Spanish Civil War, if anybody has any inkling of that, right? The Abraham Lincoln Brigade, well, there are international brigades here too.
Except for they're not speaking Yiddish, probably.
That I don't know.
That was the language of the Spanish Civil War.
Jokes that are likely to be misunderstood by the international audience. All right.
No, that's an important point that we've discussed on this show recently. That Yiddish was the language of the people fighting against Franco. Go ahead.
Right, and again, some of that spirit lives on. There's quite a number of interesting things. So the banks have been nationalized. The coal mines have been essentially seized. Then we've also got the electrical and energy sector in general operating under the strictest government supervision and orders, right, with quotas and the fulfillment of that. And then the state sector is getting even bigger. Now, here's the other thing. You go to Donetsk and you want to buy some groceries, you can now go to a state grocery store, a state-owned supermarket, in effect. And it's beautiful. It's new. It's bright. It's clean. And it's stocked with everything under the sun. It's in no way inferior to any, whatever, Safeway or Giant or whatever the supermarket is, Kroger's, whatever. It's equal to any of these, and it's state-owned. And they've got limits on markups, right? For any retail merchant, you're not allowed to mark up the merchandise. When you buy it from the wholesaler, it's 30% markup max to your retail price. So they're protecting consumers in ways that we here can only dream of. So that's that. Then the farm cooperatives. This is part of the Black Earth region, right? This is one of the most fertile agricultural regions in the world. One of the things that, one of the reasons they didn't want to be under NATO was that NATO was going to supervise the sell-off of these Black Earth agricultural holdings, farms and so forth, for rock-bottom, bargain basement prices, rip-off prices to foreign parasites, right? It would then loot this, and that would be the end of the Black Earth region. But that was stopped, and therefore they've now got, they're in the process of people are coming forward and saying, we want to try the cooperative route again. The kolkhoz, right? The collective farm, cooperative farm. They want to try
and the
that.
kulaks don't mind this time.
Joe, Tom, you got to lay off now, because this is something that is coming from the grassroots, and those people want this. They want to try it. So they're absolutely fed up with anything that reeks of globalization or financialization or derivatives or any of this stuff. Litvinov said, "Look," he said, "we've got these coal mines." We had Royal Dutch Shell came to us and said, okay, let's pretend you're independent. We want to buy those coal mines. And the answer was, niet. Royal Dutch Shell, get lost. Then Hunter Biden came, okay? The parasitical son of Vice President Joe Biden. And Hunter Biden said, my consortium from Kiev wants to buy the coal mines. And the answer to that was, niet. So these are people with a lot of guts. I think they're absolutely admirable. Now, some other things. Here we are in the early 21st century, right? We are decades deep into Club of Rome, Malthusianism, pessimism, limits to growth, overpopulation, this entire dismal parade of mystifications. Litvinov says, look, we have to worry about our population, right? At the end of the Soviet era, we had 5 million people here. Then by the time it got to be like 2013 or so, we had 4 million. Now a lot of people have fled. we've got to get them back, but we also have to think about population growth. So he said, we are putting together a package of policies that will promote, not coerce, but promote, encourage family formation and indeed child rearing, right? So we'll put that all together. And the idea was then three children per family would be a great target for the future of the country. So optimism, away from decadence and degeneracy of the type we see here, but, the idea that, de Gaulle said we should have 100 million Frenchmen, right? That was his natalisme, right? That was de Gaulle. So Litvinov, I'm not sure whether he realized that or not. I tried to talk to him about it, that he was in this great tradition of nation builders who realized that you have to increase the population, right? Absolutely in the teeth of all of these Malthusian pessimists in the West, right? And it's a very bad thing to fall under their influences. The Chinese, I think, are understanding. So there are other measures around this, but I think you get the general idea. They say this is a people's republic, not a financier's republic, not an oligarch's republic, not for generals, but a people's republic. And by God, they seem to be doing this. I would just say, since I began publishing on this at the end of April, I have noticed that Bloomberg has sent a correspondent to Donetsk specifically to report on or to cover up on the economic policies. The Handelsblatt, that is the main, it's like the German equivalent of the Wall Street Journal, more or less. They have sent a correspondent to report on the economic policies of the Donetsk government, and Russia Today has started reporting on the economics of this in a way that they haven't done. And for Russia, this is an interesting point. Those who claim that Donetsk is simply a puppet state of Putin have to realize that what is being done economically in Donetsk is far beyond anything that Putin has ever tried, right? The Putin government essentially represents a compromise with oligarchs who have been chastened, to be sure, right? They've seen their leader, Khodorkovsky, put in jail and kept there for 10 years and more, but the oligarchs are still there, right? In other words, you don't hear Putin going on television and saying, I'm against neoliberalism and I'm against oligarchy. That we do not hear. But that
well, hold on. The oligarch of time is biting us right now. We'll be right back, friends. We're speaking with Webster Tarpley about his recent trip to the People's Republic of Donetsk. Right back with Webster after this. Hey, good friends. Welcome back. Tom Kiely, INN World Report Radio. Dr. Webster Tarpley in the house. We have been learning about the Ukraine from Dr. Tarpley, several other sources for some time. This is the first opportunity that we've had to get somebody back from there to give us this firsthand account. Then it's really, really welcome news. It sounds like the people in Donetsk are really doing the right thing, and more power to them. Bravo. Webster, can you please continue with your fascinating report?
Thank you, Tom. When I was in St. Petersburg, Russia now, dealing with these people from the Russian Academy of Sciences, very distinguished scholars, Bogomolov was there. Oleg Bogomolov, who's been writing for many years, and then, of course, Professor Galbraith was there and many others. The whole discussion in St. Petersburg revolved around, we've got to get out of globalization. Globalization is a disaster. Different views of it, but most agree it's a disaster. We've got to get out of this. We've got to get away from it. And what do we do? And what I was able to deliver, I think, and I hope to get I gave a couple of interventions. I was, on the podium of one of the 5 workshops that they held, sections of discussion, and I tried to point out that the problem of ending globalization is being solved in Greece in one way. It may be solvable in Portugal. Portugal seems to be coming on board with the Greek approach. At least the Socialist Party of Portugal is contending in an election pretty much on the Syriza platform. And then we have this somewhat mixed phenomenon in Spain where you have this Iglesias who is not a capable leader, but then you have a large movement, Podemos, which could be eminently viable if you could just get Iglesias out of there. But it's also being solved in maybe the most advanced way in Donetsk. And one of the advantages they have is they don't have the International Monetary Fund. They're not part of it. They don't have the World Trade Organization. They're not part of that either. They don't have the Troika. They don't have the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and all of these other oppressive organizations. So my message to the people in St. Petersburg at this conference, as much as I could, is to say the theoretical problems that you are posing here are eminently the ones, right? Those are the ones we need to address. But I think I can say that some of the most advanced answers are actually taking form practically, right, in real, implementation in Donetsk, in the Donetsk People's Republic, and also to some extent in Lugansk, although Lugansk is something that I know much less about, haven't been there. They're less in the center of the military operation, but they are, of course, together with Donetsk, Lugansk is now part of the Parliament of Novorossiya, which is this future or present and future state which seems to be arising on the north, on the northern shores of the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea. So that's all going on. Now,
Webster, I have a very quick question for you. I don't want to derail you, but if you could just speak to it briefly. I was hoping you might punch off Iceland and Ireland in those incubators against globalization.
No,
are they in the running at all?
No, not at all. Iceland has failed. Iceland needed to declare a debt moratorium, and instead their currency collapsed, and along with their currency, their standard of living collapsed, because that's what happens when your currency collapsed. And Ireland, no, I don't see that at all. I think there's nothing at all there. There's got to be struggle here, and here's the thing. A mass movement. That's what you have in Donetsk. Now, this is the analysis of Professor Baryshnikov, and you can look him up. He's widely interviewed. He was for several months the rector, the boss, in effect, the top man of the university in Donetsk, right? The principal university of the Donetsk People's Republic was run by Professor Baryshnikov. So he gives a sociological analysis, and he basically says the phenomenon that has taken place as a mass movement in Donetsk and surrounding areas is not understandable. It does not fall under any of the existing academic models. In other words, a Marxist could not explain it. A spontaneous or I would say it's understandable in terms of Rosa Luxemburg's mass strike model. That would be my contention, and that Rosa Luxemburg is dealing with areas that are actually not so far from the ones we're talking about. But here's the idea. What
about Chile in '73? Anything remotely similar to that?
I think we better stick to our mouton, right? Because we got hot news, and the other stuff is well known. So look, here's what Baryshnikov says. In late 2013, as this Maidan fascist pageant was being geared up, right, with the $5 billion from Nuland and, Nuland's cookies and Piat and this parade of officials from the European Union, as all of that was going on, there was a mass movement, a mass strike movement, in my terminology, that was emerging in Lugansk and Donetsk and these other areas of eastern Ukraine, and of course in Crimea, because that was the leading edge of the whole thing, was that there was a movement in Crimea. This is a mass strike movement of the middle class, and this is now occurring in what we would have to call a second world country, right? This is no longer someplace in the third world, right? But now we're in the second world, as it used to be called. And therefore, from the second world, we have to derive important lessons for the first world, right? That's us, right? Europe, U.S., Japan, first world. So in terms of revolutionary perspectives, what do we find? And this is what Baryshnikov went into very kindly, spelling this out for a group of us, right, on the Europa Objektiv tour. So he says, look, this is an authentic grassroots movement, and it starts with three classes of people. The young people and the pensioners, people who are retired. So young people and retired people, and then people of any age who are unemployed. But then he says in the middle, there's a mass of people, it's more or less Generation X, right, that are in it. They were indifferent. They waited to see who would win before they made any move. But the youth were out in front, and the retirees were out in front, and the unemployed were out in front. So he describes, and I'll try to write this up because I do have the notes in some detail. He describes this process of meetings and demonstrations and nonviolent. It's not armed. In other words, the people who do the main stuff are organizing politically, okay? No gun fetishism, because that's just not how it was done. But they eventually, it turns into a mass strike of, everybody coming into Lenin Square in front of the administration building. If I showed you this administration building, and I do have some pictures that I'm going to try to get up on the internet, you'll recognize it, because this is what everybody in the world was looking at, essentially in the late spring of last year, around now, in effect. So the people are coming there, and eventually it gets to be everybody is out in Lenin Square all day, every day. So it's just the places come to a halt, and eventually they get to the point of declaring independence. Now, the Declaration of Independence of the Donetsk People's Republic was written in the night of, I think, the 6th to the 7th of April, if I'm not mistaken, and it was written by this guy, Litvinov. So we have a couple of politicians, Purgin and another one, plus Litvinov. So it's like the committee, right? It's like Philadelphia in 1776, except that this time, when we get to all the discussion, it's Boris Litvinov who goes home and writes.
Welcome back. Tom Kiely here, INN World Report Radio. We're going to get right back to it with Dr. Webster Tarpley. It is a very encouraging sign, my friends. For years and years, our country has run the table with the one-sided story that they put out, Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, and so forth. We've all heard Victoria Nuland talk about the $5 billion that was spent laying the groundwork to destroy the Ukraine. It looks like finally the rest of the world is wising up and saying, hey, this has been a one-way fight. Why don't we invest a little bit in free exchange of information? It's really great. People like Webster Tarpley now getting to go over there and take a look at what's going on. I think it's wonderful. We've been doing it for decades. What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, and bravo. We should see a lot more of this kind of thing. Webster, why don't you finish up here in the last segment of the show and tell us a little bit more about this incredible trip that you were just on?
So the idea is a middle-class movement. In other words, what you'd want to have here. So, I say we can learn a great deal from studying what happened and what didn't happen. So, the young, the retirees, and the unemployed, but that group in the middle is indifferent, right? They want to see who's going to win before they commit to any side. This is the analysis from Baryshnikov. And one of the things I got out of Baryshnikov's talk was that the people who had been considered the left-wing intellectuals, right, the poobahs of the left, the people who normally should have, of course, taken leadership in this, totally struck out. So what I'm saying is the Noam Chomskys, right, the Amy Goodmans, the Michael Moores, the Naomi Kleins, right, these people turn out to be exactly useless when the going gets rough, and therefore they've mostly been discredited, right? In the case of Ukraine, it was the party of the regions, right, the Yanukovych party, who discredited themselves because they simply couldn't produce anything. They didn't do anything. There were several attempts made to get the regional assembly this is back in April, May of last year, they should declare independence, as a regional assembly. No, they wouldn't do it for quite a long time until the thing had matured. But they weren't leading; they were following. Right, the mass movement was out in front of them. So I would say, let's think about the U.S. and let's think about the young people, right? The millennials crushed by student loan debt. The retirees faced by brutal, killer austerity cuts coming from people like Rand Paul and the other libertarians, as well as the normal Republicans with the connivance of the Democrats. And then let's look at the unemployed, right? The 99ers. Well, most unemployment is now down to 26 weeks again, right? The stimulus gave some benefits, but those are all gone now. So that's now a thing of the past. So we have to think about that, right? And in the teeth of this attempt by the controlled media to market this parade of fascists in the Republican Party, and not mention that these people are genocidalists and fascists, I think it's time to think about the old, the retirees, the young, the unemployed, and crushed by student loan, and then these other the unemployed in the middle. Now, Baryshnikov, he has other things to say. I'll try to write some of those. But now let's just think about the parade, right, on May 11th that I got to attend, thanks to Foreign Minister Kaufman. So I'm pretty sure I was the only one from the U.S. I don't know, but I think. And I live tweeted it. If you want to get, it's like a first-hand flavor of this thing, go to Webster G. Tarpley Twitter and look down a little bit, right? And if you get back to around May 11th, or May 11th exactly, you'll see 20 or 25 tweets that I put out with a couple of pictures coming from Donetsk. So the idea is this. Every locality paraded by, now you have to think about this. These are not professional soldiers, most of them. They're just middle-class people. They're more or less like anybody, might be listening to this program. At a certain point, they decided, we are not going to knuckle under to that fascist clique in Kiev. We are going to resist, and we will not allow them to crush us and walk all over us. So they have every town had a delegation, a bunch of people parading behind a banner, what town, all different towns. And then they had the representatives of the occupational groupings, right? So they have coal miners. That's a very large group. They have the electrical workers. They have the metal workers, right? People who do, things like, the UAW, that kind of stuff. A lot of them are then organized into trade unions. And then you had, again, the machine tool builders. And I can't, every time I think about this, I think if you reported this on American television, people would be saying, what's a machine tool? Because we don't make any to speak of anymore, but they do. And they think that's important. So they're going to fight for their machine tool industry because that's their future. And they're absolutely right. Machine tools are always the future. So, and then they have all this stuff about, the cheering, right? Excuse me. Hoorah, hoorah, hoorah. Sorry. A little bit of the respiratory stuff from the trip. But you get the idea. So the cultural atmosphere is sort of the late Soviet era, right? Plenty of freedom, say whatever you want. But the idea is that working people are valued. When's the last time you saw a parade, like the Macy's Thanksgiving or some other parade, where different kinds of working people, blue-collar workers, were honored? And not just that, the teachers were honored. The medical workers were honored. Because the idea is that they have been fighting. These middle-class people, with the help of some foreign volunteers and some others, have primarily taken upon themselves the task of beating back these fascist killers who want to come into their town and kill them all. And they stopped them at the airport. Now, they also say, they regret very much that they were not able to prevent the Kiev fascists from landing these, forces at the airport, which they were able to do. But even so, right, they've held out for a whole year, and this thing has now taken on, I think, a rather robust life of its own. So I think this is an absolutely admirable thing. And again, if you've been looking for a government that would nationalize the banks, tell Hunter Biden to go to hell, and Royal Dutch Shell, and prevent the looting of the agricultural lands and all these other things that we've heard about, this thing deserves your support. In other words, this is a real novelty, right? This is something radically new on the world stage, which shows that to the extent that the globalists, globalization freaks, pitch the world into crisis, that that will actually open the door to more radical reforms than one had ever imagined. So this was a great day, right? You see them out there in a wonderful festival atmosphere. Nobody with guns until there was a military contingent and a few tanks at the end. But it was not. This was not a festival of hatred. This was somehow relief that they'd held on for a year and that they were still alive and still fighting. Now, Baryshnikov says, we have survived thanks to the subtle aid of Putin. They are not puppets of Russia in any way, shape, or form. They are going way beyond it, although Litvinov said that he was getting advice from two institutes in Moscow were suggesting some of these radical reforms. But that's not Putin, that's not the Kremlin. Those are, scholars in Moscow who study economics and economic reform. So,
Webster, we only have about a minute, 2 minutes before the music starts. I have a very quick question for you. What about this visit by Carey and Newland? Was this a dog and pony show? Are they stalling for time, or do they really think that they need to change things?
When I was there just now, the second time, there was this meeting in Sochi where Lavrov, the foreign minister, and Putin met with Kerry, and I guess Newland too. And that is quite possibly the Obama administration realizing they cannot win with this stupid, ridiculous, infantile policy which they've been trying up to now, right? That as I passed through Moscow on the 9th of May, and there you saw Putin talking very cordially with General Sisi, president of Egypt. And then you saw Medvedev talking with President Xi of China and others, right? So they had isolation. Oh, my God. They've got Egypt. They've got China. They're not going to die of solitude. I'll tell you that. They're not isolated.
And the Europeans are not happy with the situation. That, I would think, has as much to do with it as almost anything. Am I wrong with that opinion?
No, I think you're right. In other words, this whole stupid provocation policy that started with the Maidan and the 5 billion and the coup and installing this Poroshenko, we call him Poroshenko because his policies are obscene, right? So this is all failing. So it seemed to me that this was actually a break. In other words, this was the highest level and longest, real meeting of U.S. and Russian officials for the whole time, and I welcome it. I hope that it turns out to be something, because they're talking about Ukraine, talking about Syria, talking about other things. Let's turn away from the brink of catastrophe and stop with these silly, military posturings of NATO with their token forces, their ridiculous token for 300 advisors in Ukraine. It's not worth it, right? It's more provocation than any benefit it could be. It's ridiculous.
Well, let's hope it's for real and it's not just stalling for time while Kiev gets its act together. Webster, thank you so much. I will see you Saturday at the Left Forum. That's it for this week's programming. Webster Tarpley, you can see all of this at tarpley.net. Thank you, Webster.
Thank you very much, Tom.
All right. Have a great weekend, friends. We'll see you on Tuesday night. Good friends, welcome back. Tom Kiely here, INN World Report Radio, every Tuesday and Thursday night here on the great Logos Radio Network. I am going to get right down to it, fresh back from Russia and the Ukraine. We have not been able to have him on the show. He's been a bit incommunicado, as it were. Webster Tarpley back in the United States just only a few days ago. Webster, welcome back, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule this weekend with the Left Forum here in New York to come on the show.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you again, because I think I have some very interesting news about the Donetsk People's Republic, which is not part of Ukraine anymore.
Well, we're all set. We're ready to hear it, Webster. Let us have it, man. We want to get every last observation that you can share with us.
So let me tell you, first of all, my story. I've been to Russia and to Donetsk twice now in the past 2 months. I was there in the middle of April, and that was a tour organized by a Russian news agency, which is particularly active in Germany. It's called Europa Objektiv. And they had put out a call, right, that some people saw, that they said if you are a professional journalist, if you're not part of those, felt that I had to go. I think I was the only representative from the United States in this class, which I'm sorry for, but at least I was there, so the United States did not, get completely eclipsed. So we did what we could, and they were having some events also. They had a kind of a discussion conference of their own, right? Something along the lines of Ligachoff, maybe. But I mainly went there to see the parade on May 11th, and then take part in the reception of the foreign ministry of Donetsk. So this is essentially the path that took me to knowing some of these things. I would just throw in immediately that after I had gone the first time, some of the same people that had helped me were visiting one of these neighborhoods in the northwest part of Donetsk, close to the international airport. And that is, of course, the Prokofiev International Airport. That's Sergei Prokofiev, right? The great, I think, fascinating composer.
The composer, right?
Wrote the Lieutenant Kiji suite, right? I urge people to listen to this. He's one of the most intelligent and ironical composers of the 20th century. So he's from there, right? And there's an industrial town with coal mines, and they have these slag berms all over the horizon, right? In other words, when you have a lot of coal mining going on, it generates this byproduct, the slag. So it's there. So there are parts of Donetsk that are sort of under the gun of these Ukrainian fascist forces. And on May 2nd, there was a group of people the group that came after me was being, toured. They were getting the tour from the people. I had been to the same Oktyabrskaya neighborhood, the sort of the October Revolution part of town, right? So the journalists were there. Somehow these Kiev characters caught sight of them, and they actually began shelling them with artillery. And they had to go into the basements of these buildings, right, sort of rudimentary bunkers that are there. And, that's a place where old men and old women and sick people live. But those Kiev guys, they are merciless, right? They are fascist bandits in my book. And they started shooting at the people that I knew. And there's been another Ligachoff conference that is the largest scholarly, cultural, scientific, political conference in the world, I think. This time it was about 220 participants with papers from 30 different countries. I mean, one of them was the former president, Akayev of Uzbekistan, and some other very well-known people. Professor Galbraith, the economist from the University of Texas, was also there. So I'd been invited to that, and then just as I was getting ready to leave for that, I got an invitation from the foreign ministry, specifically from the foreign minister of the Donetsk People's Republic. This is a very intelligent man, Alexander Kaufman, and he said, look, Tarpley, you should come to the Independence Day, which marked the referendum. In other words, on May 11th last year, 2014, a very large part of the population of the Donetsk Oblast province voted to become autonomous, independent, and no longer take orders from Kiev. So this was the first anniversary. So I reach people like CBS or the New York Times. We will assist you. If you can get yourself to Moscow, we will help you to go down to, as it turned out, Rostov-on-Don, down at the Sea of Azov, and then drive across into the free territory of Ukraine. In other words, the Donetsk People's Republic. So that whole process included a briefing in Moscow from some very knowledgeable observers, and then this trip during which I met some people, and some of this I published. I'm behind on the writing and publishing, so please forgive me. That stuff will be coming, including quite a number of pictures. Then I had been invited to the Likhachov International Scientific Conference. This was organized by the Russian Academy of Sciences and the Russian Foreign Ministry in St. Petersburg, the former capital, right before Moscow, which is it's the largest city in Northern Europe. This is a whole story in itself. This is, of course, where the Russian Revolution, so to speak, took place, right? The Winter Palace, the Hermitage, and all this. So I was headed to this